Hello to old friends who I recognize quite a few, and hello to all the new friends as well. So it's wonderful you're here. And this is a really important talk because it's not just a talk, it's actually the launch of this report. And I'm not exaggerating when I believe that an ecocide law for an economy within planetary limits, when this legislation is enacted, it will be about the most important new legislation in the international legislation in the 21st century. It's no exaggeration to say that this is critical for people on the planet, because we're going way beyond, as everybody knows, the planet's carrying capacity on biodiversity, extreme weather, climate change, etc. And we're just using far more resources and far more of the planet's carrying capacity than we should. And there is no legal way of tackling this, and there's a massive gap. So a fifth crime ecocide is critically needed. It's the most important bit of legislation one can imagine. And we've got two of the authors of this report with us today. And let me just introduce them, and then I'm going to introduce Richard, who is a legal expert, a bit later on. Jonas Roupé is a business renewal, sustainability and recycling and circular economy expert. He works nationally and internationally as an advisor and strategist for the consultancy firm Prosperous Planet. But he's also got a long business background as head of strategy, business intelligence, multiple other roles with companies like Ericsson, Telisonera and Scanova. I'm not sure I can pronounce it. So brilliant person with business and NGO background. And then we've also got Kristín Vala Ragnarsdottír. I never pronounce her name right. I just call her the wonderful Vala, as she's a great friend of mine, who is a professor of earth sciences at the Institute of Earth Sciences in the University of Iceland. And she's been working on sustainability related research and teaching since the turn of the century. She's a member of numerous really important sustainability think tanks, the Club of Rome, the Balaton Group, the Schumacher Institute in the UK, as well as being an ambassador and great friend of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And she's published numerous books, and soon to be completed is Rethinking Economics, Global Wellbeing, which will be coming out soon. I won't mention all the others, you can read them in people's bios. But we've got two wonderful speakers, and I'm going to hand over now to Jonas to kick us off, and he'll pass straight over to Vala. And then I'm going to be, after that, I'll be going to be asking Richard to respond to a couple of questions, wearing his legal hat, and then we'll throw things open for questions. And we'll do it mostly by interacting with people putting their hand up and saying they want to ask questions. I think that's going to be more interactive than doing everything through the chat. So that's the structure. We look forward to a great hour, and this is really the beginning of something absolutely, well, the continuation actually, because there's been a lot of work going on it, as you'll hear, but this is a vital stepping stone in the path to getting an ecocide law. Jonas, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you fine.
Very good. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very delighted, so very delighted to be here and be able to present this very important report that Vala and I co-authored. It was project managed, I should say, through the association and Ecocide Sweden. I noticed at least one of the board members of Ecocide Sweden is joining us now. That's good. And published also through the lovely cooperation with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and the Schumacher Institute. And it was funded by the Swedish Postcode Foundation. And the topic, of course, is ecocide law for an economy within planetary boundaries. And let's see if I could just get it to start. Very important thing is that we based the research on what is called the consensus definition by the independent expert drafting panel that was launched a little bit more than a year ago. And Richard Rogers is with us, being one of the experts in that panel of 12 international experts in international law. It is about putting a fifth crime to the Rome Statute. So the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, it's the governing document of the International Criminal Court. It lists today 4 crimes. It lists genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes of aggression, crimes that the international community regard as abhorrent and something that needs to be sanctioned and will be sanctioned. So the idea is then to add a 5th crime, ecocide. It's not a new idea. We can get back to that later, but probably the time and the urgency hasn't been there until now. So putting ecocide into one of the most powerful legal documents in the world acts, I would say, like an umbrella. So it complements and strengthens other laws. And it's also important from a legal perspective to say that it's a court of last resort. So when national courts cannot or don't want to, for some reason, prosecute nationally, they have given jurisdiction to the ICC to do that and to be of support. And when it comes to crimes against the environment, it certainly seems, and we certainly believe from this report, that we need an international guardrail. But it also establishes a moral baseline, what the international community regards as abhorrent and something that will be sanctioned. The moral baseline aspect of having a 5th crime of mass damage and destruction of the environment cannot be underestimated. In June 2021 was the launch of this consensus definition. I will not dwell upon it more since we have Richard here and we could easily go in more detail later. But that is the base for the analysis we've done. And the definition itself is very short, surprisingly short for such a powerful and well-written piece, I would say. It reads like this: for the purpose of this statute, ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And for anyone not native English, wanton is kind of the difficult word. And the definition proposed by the independent expert drafting panel defines wanton like this. It means reckless disregard for damage which would be clearly excessive in relation to the social and economic benefits anticipated. This, when you look at it from an economist and a business perspective, this is a beautiful kind of word to have here, because it makes the definition follow along as things progress. So things that are, not excessive today might be, those practices might be in 20 years obsolete. And then the definition is still relevant and could help and support, you could say, society to get rid of obsolete, excessive damages or methods. And then this, as you can see, contains several thresholds in order for it to qualify as an ecocide crime. It will only, and it's designed to only deal with the absolute worst crimes, not all the environmental crimes, but it's a very good starting point. It needs to be considered as an act in order for it to be caught by this definition. It doesn't need to have happened. It requires substantial likelihood in case it hasn't happened, and it needs to be severe, as you can see, or either widespread or long-term damage. And these words follow jurisprudence from the International Criminal Court and are not fussy. They are rather clear from a legal perspective, and that's also a strength with this new definition. And also, as a backgrounder, I pulled out this illustration. Actually, it's not in the report, but in all relevant aspects, it is covered in the report. But this comes from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report from 2022, and it lists the most potentially damaging risks for the international community, you could say. And one is that climate action failure. Certainly looks like we are failing in it. Extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, which is a core planetary boundary, which could by itself destabilize all of humanity on the Earth, on the surface of the Earth. Livelihood crisis, social cohesion erosion, and they are interrelated. And when these risks or hazards, there's a difference between that and a catastrophe, and it's about mitigating if you cannot prevent, and adapting if you cannot mitigate. And Ecocide is one of the very few, I would say it's unique, absolutely unique in this capacity to mitigate and prevent things from happening. And what is kind of troublesome is, as World Economic Forum points out, they aggravate a lot of other, for society and for humanity and other species on the planet, very problematic risks. So the economy, you could say, and the ability to intercept these risks before they deteriorate and become even worse is vital, and that is kind of what we are looking at. And there is a legend here, but because World Economic Forum separates what type of risk it is, but we don't need to go into that now. A few things, how the Ecocide law in the Rome Statute will impact the economic system. You could say it in simple terms that it upgrades rules. It levels simply the international playing field, since it's in effect a global law. Even if all countries haven't ratified it, we are so tied together in the economic system when it comes to selling and producing goods. The competence and the money and the insurance required for operations ties us globally together very effectively, and it upgrades that. And it strengthens international agreements, for instance, that is already existing but fails to consider economic problems or ecological problems. And it complements, for instance, bilateral agreements and corporate law when they are unclear or not followed. And so upgrading rules is important because in several states, the legal systems are weak, laws aren't followed, and it actually gives a competitive advantage from economic perspective, at least, for those that don't follow the local laws. Strengthen is important because it improves the likelihood of success for Agenda 2030, that is the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement and other political consensus documents like that. They typically discuss what is desirable, but not what needs to be stopped now, these agreements. And it avoids court cases where nature is set against international trade agreements, for instance, which is big business for some type of companies. And this is achieved because in the first case, Ecocide law sets a minimum international standard for accountability for ecocide. Of course, some countries have other legal mechanisms that can be very effective, perhaps even more effective and more comprehensive than Ecocide law, but not all countries and not in all cases. So it sets a minimum standard which levels the playing field, and it fills in gaps when the national laws are lacking or the legal system is weak. And then number two is achieved through as the worst transgressions against climate and nature are becoming prosecutable. And then number three is achieved as Ecocide laws acts as an umbrella law when care for the environment is missing. You cannot have, for instance, a binding document where you promise to make profit by genocide. So it's kind of, and the same would be then the case for Ecocide. So that was a few things, and I'd like to leave over the word to Vala.
Yes, Ecocide law, we could say, has the power to shift the world system, because if we look here at the places to intervene in a system from the Donella Meadows, where we have actually been trying to change the system, has to been at the towards the top of this half pyramid, number 12, such as putting on subsidies and taxes and standards, which isn't shifting the system at all. And we are still working on destroying on ecological basis and eating up our resources. We need to dive much deeper into the system. So Jonas, can you show me the rest of this? To go and more.
Yes.
To go to change the intent and the design of the system. So definitely Ecocide law would change the rules of the system. And even the intent can be said to be changed, where we are actually shifting people's values. So we have the power to transcend paradigms with Ecocide law. And this is why we feel it's so important to set this law. So can I have the next slide, please? Because at the moment, it's actually lawful to degenerate our global ecosystems and our biosphere. But with the Ecocide law, further on, Jonas, please, you have to follow me, then this regeneration of the biosphere will be illegal and will stop and will allow the biosphere to regenerate if we shift the financial flows in the right direction. So can I have the next one? Because 100% of our economy is depending on nature, as shown so well here in a diagram from the Dasgupta report. Without healthy ecosystems, we do not have a healthy economy. So it's simple. If we need to change the base rules so that the ecosystems will not continue to be attacked as they are today. And the next one. So we could say that the economy today is being driven outside of nature, and we need to bring the economy within nature, as the planetary boundaries and the donut economics model show so beautifully. And the next one. And this will help us to go from unstable growth and go from climate change risk, where we have increased natural disasters and ecosystem and biodiversity decline and natural capital risk and conflicts over water and land. So it's absolutely crucial to get the Ecocide law so that we can protect nature for the future. The next one. Because when we destabilize nature, we destabilize our economy, as I'm sure all of you know. So if we have no natural capital, we do not have any human or produced capital. It's all interdependent. It's all an interconnected system, and we are a part of nature, and therefore we need to protect nature. And the next one.
Yes. And shall I continue, perhaps?
Please.
Yes. So a common way to describe this is you have nature which puts bounds on society, and then society and nature puts bounds on economy. And what of course have happened is that economy is outside the bounds, and you call that in economic term externalities, things that aren't measured or valued in the system and not steered away from. And some externalities we looked at in the beginning, but listed here is climate change, biodiversity loss, natural resource crisis, social cohesion erosion, and livelihood crisis. And so what we will discuss even more here is how Ecocide brings that into balance. And this is kind of an important graph. It shows the material footprint. The material footprint of our society is the key driving force for destabilizing both climate and also biodiversity. Or the ecosystems. And it, as you can see, has increased and follows very closely global GDP unnecessarily, and also greenhouse gases. So we need to reduce the burden on nature, of course, and also how we fuel the economy. So a safety rail is needed. Otherwise, this will continue regardless of how well we understand the problem. And in 3 points, you could say Ecocide provides natural protection for the living system on which the world depends, not for everything, but for the worst things. It preempts Ecocide by making the very worst legal and wanton acts very risky for the decision makers involved and very hard, if not impossible, to ensure. or fund, and it levels the playing field for businesses, improving the conditions. And I could tell you, planning for sustainable business is very difficult when you don't know when or if or how the playing field will be corrected. So it will make sustainable options a lot more viable. So you could say, if you want to summarize all that self-interest needs to be aligned with the common interests, and that's the deterrent is needed so that wealth cannot be made on the expense of others or our future. So it's a really systemic solution. And Vala, this is your slide.
So Ecocide law underpins the building of a circular regenerative economy for the well-being of people and planet. The principles of the circular model are that it eliminates waste and pollution, circulates products and materials at their highest value, and regenerates nature. And the Paris Agreement can be achieved by doubling circularity, is an outcome of a new report from circular.
Yes.
Can I have the next slide?
Yes.
And fossil fuels are currently being subsidized at the rate of almost $6 trillion. So the funds are available in our global system. So what we need to do is to redirect these financial flows into investments to stay below 2 degrees, which are estimated to be only about half of the subsidies to fossil fuels. And the benefits that are being paid out in these fossil fuel subsidies actually go to the richest 20%. And this is heightening the inequality in the world. So this is why it's important to redirect the flows of finance. Can I have the next one? And actually, people might say that, oh, there are big risks if we adopt Ecocide law. Actually, it's only big risk for very few industries that are producing most of our pollution. But there are opportunities for others, for almost everybody on the planet. It provides, as Jonas has said, a level green playing field across the globe and allows sustainable practices to become profitable. It provides legal clarity to make it easier to operate a sustainable business, as some business leaders have said. Business prefers a long-term stable rules to follow, have others said. And Jonas said that also earlier. It supports businesses that have strong ESG and CSR. And planet-leading businesses will become market-leading, has another, we quote another industrial leader in the report. And it creates more jobs than the jobs that will be lost. So this is really a no-brainer to adopt Ecocide law and provide all these opportunities. Next one. And Ecocide law is on the political agenda all over the world. As you can see, in the Asian Pacific, in Europe, in North America and South America, in Africa, there are many groups discussing it. And there are also international organizations such as the European Parliament and the Council of Europe who are discussing this, as well as the Nordic Council and the Interparliamentary Union. Can I have the next one? So the proposal of this new law into the Rome Statute is rather easy. Only one country or a group of countries can propose it. And then at the next meeting of the criminal court, which is annually in December, other nations can vote for it. And it requires 2/3 of those that have signed the Rome Statute, which are 123 countries. So that's 82 countries to agree to the law. And then it can be ratified 1 year later. The Ecocide law can be applied in the countries that have ratified it under the state's national international law. So can I have the next one? And so there are supporters of Ecocide everywhere, from the United Nations to the Vatican, to the International Criminal Court, as well as members of the public and the youngsters like Greta Thunberg and the youngsters in the world, and Jane Goodall, and former President of Finland, Tarja Halonen, and Princess Emeralda of Belgium, and President of France, Emmanuel Macron. So there is a mounting support for this law to be adopted. Can I have the next one? And actually the European Parliament has spent some time debating it, the International Parliamentary Union as well. The Global Youth demanded Ecocide law in Stockholm last June. The World Council of Churches is promoting it, and the Council of Europe is actually having a week-long meeting this week, where amongst other issues, Ecocide will be discussed or is being discussed. So the next one. So thank you for listening, and you can actually get the report by following this QR code or finding it with this link. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Vala, thank you so much. Jonas, thank you so much. That was a brilliant presentation. And we'll come back to all the questions in a little bit, but I want to next bring Richard in. Richard Rogers has been a barrister in London, attorney in San Francisco, but very importantly is for this talk, a senior UN lawyer at several UN war crimes tribunals. And he's got a particular expertise in the intersection between international criminal law and mass environmental destruction. And as we've already heard, he's been one of the members of this 12 people on the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide that we saw in the presentation. And Richard's a founding partner of organizations like Global Diligence, and which is an advisory firm specializing in international crime and human rights. And he's executive director of Climate Council, another non-profit. So he's got massive legal and expertise, and both in the international criminal area and in the environmental area. Richard, I had a couple of questions for you. What's the thing that most stands out for you about this in this report?
Yes, thanks, Stuart, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me. Well, I think it's a very important report, and what really stood out for me was how effectively it outlined the sort of breadth of all the advantages of a new crime of ecocide, and how those can lead to change hopefully before the destruction occurs. Because we don't care that much if people are put in prison. What we want to do is prevent the destruction in the first place. And clearly those advantages are that it's a criminal law, so it can issue indictments, there can be a trial, there can be imprisonment. It's not just about fines that might be paid. It has a wide net of criminal liability, so it's not just about the direct perpetrators who might be prosecuted. There's also those who might fund the operations that destroy the environment, those who are complicit, those who aid and abet, etc. But perhaps most importantly, the biggest advantage is its enormous symbolic value. And the report makes this very clear, that the weight of moral condemnation for violators would be enormous, because there's only currently 4 international crimes. This would be the 5th one. And so it'd be like becoming a war criminal if you commit ecocide. And criminal law, it's always been one of the best tools to change behavior. And an international law can be even more effective, because nobody wants to become some kind of pariah. And I think the report is very effective in how it shows that the combination of these advantages will help change consciousness firstly, and then will help change behavior. And it uses a very good example of how at the moment, generally, if corporations destroy the environment unlawfully, then they may be subject to a fine. And the problem with that is that the fine is paid by the bank accounts of the corporation, not by an individual. And oftentimes the corporations have very deep pockets, so they just pay the fines and then carry on with business as usual. So it sort of becomes a cost of doing business. Now, with an ecocide law, it would be individuals who were the focus of criminal investigations. They probably wouldn't even be able to use the company profits to pay their legal fees, let alone pay the fine, and it wouldn't keep them out of prison if they were convicted. So a crime of ecocide will really help to reset the risk, and by resetting that risk, making it much more serious for individuals, directors and owners, etc., then it will help change behavior.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really clear. Thanks, Richard. And one, before we go to general questions, one question that I see in the chat that's pertinent to you, I think, is the question of to what extent would bringing the Ecocide law into the Rome Statute hold people accountable for things that have already been committed? And does that cover anything or not? That was something somebody was asking, and other examples of that happening for other crimes.
Well, the short answer is no, because criminal laws are not retroactive. So it would only apply to behaviors, to harms, to crimes that happen after the law was adopted. But a caveat to that is that some crimes are continuing. They may have started before a long time ago and may continue after an ecocide law is adopted. So those ones would be covered.
Great. That's really so helpful. Thank you, Richard. And please, we're going to open up to general questions now, but please feel free to dive into those questions. As you know, I'll ask obviously Jonas and Vala to respond to it, but any that you feel you've got something to say on, please add in there. That's really clear. Well, we've had a really clear explanation from Richard and excellent presentations from Jonas and Vala. And yes, we will make the slides available to everybody, and the report will be available via our website as well as those links soon after this meeting. So what I want to do now is to open up to general questions, and if you could put your if you go on the reaction button, because there's so many people, I probably won't be able to see if you just put your hand up, or won't know whether you're doing your hair or scratching your nose or what. So if anybody, I'll take probably 2 or 3 questions at a time, and so please use the reaction button to put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. I see one from Amanda. I'll bring you in a second, Amanda. Anybody else want to come in with a question right now? And Simon, I see Simon Ticehurst. Okay, brilliant. Well, let's start with those 2. And oh, Sally Lawson, brilliant, Sally. Let's take 3 from you. So keep it fairly short if you can, everybody. Because we won't have a lot of time, and it's vital we get as many questions in as we can. I'll take groups of 3 at one time. So Amanda, welcome. Your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Amazing. Such a great presentation. My question is around, so I understand that the law would be focused on individuals, and I was just wondering if corporations or even sectors have ever been brought to the International Criminal Court. And part of the reason I'm asking this is, you know, a lot of the ways that corporations nowadays are able to get around like human rights, like sort of violations, is by outsourcing that production to much smaller and less powerful sort of entities. And so I wonder if there's a risk here of, if it's just on individuals who would end up being, you know, the most sort of vulnerable, who end up being persecuted, as opposed to the powerful ones who sort of made that decision in the first place, who are, you know, at the higher levels of corporate ownership.
Thanks, Amanda. Simon, and then Sally.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation, really inspiring. And when the question immediately comes to me, you've laid out the sort of the more bureaucratic route to get this into the Rome Statute. But my question is, what do we need to do collectively, more politically, socially, movements, to actually make this happen? Any ideas on that? And we can, you know, put our shoulder to the task.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sally. Oh, you're muted, Sally. Oh, can't hear you at the minute. Oh, sorry.
Right, sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, my question is from Richard Rogers, and thank you, all the talks are fantastic. But just following up the idea that it's all going to be future crimes, is there a danger that once people know that this law might come to get them in the future, that they might accelerate their crimes? You know, things like accelerating the destruction of the Amazon, for example. Just a question about that risk.
No, brilliant, very clear question. Thanks, Sally. Okay, so who would like to? That last one's obviously for particularly for Richard, but the question about corporations and the question about what we need to collectively do. Please.
Richard, would you like to start, and I could fill in, or Vala?
Yeah, well, the short answer is that corporations cannot be prosecuted at the ICC, only individuals, only humans. But I think a lot of people see this as a major problem, and it really depends on the facts. But the reality is that it's individuals that commit the crimes. Just with an army, you don't put an army on trial. It's individual members of the army who commit war crimes. You don't put a government on trial. It's individual members of the government who instruct, who order, who plan crimes against humanity, for example. So it will be exactly the same thing with Ecocide, that you can get the higher ups, you can get the people that did the planning, you can get the people that did the financing, those who conceived the crimes at the highest level, because international criminal law is designed to get those people at the top. From the time of the Nuremberg tribunals and the Tokyo tribunals, the aim was not to focus on the foot soldiers, but to focus on those who orchestrated the crimes, who planned them, who ordered them. And it will be the same thing with Ecocide. So, you know, there will be some extra complications with the corporate veil and all that, but the reality is that if an individual is complicit, if they aid and abet, if they finance, if they order, if it's their idea and they're in charge, then they will probably be criminally responsible. So it's an issue, but it's the same issue with genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes.
Right. And Richard, Sally's question about, is there a risk once people know this is coming, that they get on and plunder even faster?
Possibly, but I think it's worth remembering that Ecocide is only meant to focus on the very worst cases. So those cases, it's not as if they can happen under the spotlight, you know, and in all likelihood, not in every case, but in most cases, they will be illegal by a national law anyway. So I think the risk is fairly small, because to suddenly commit some sort of vast destruction of the Amazon is hardly going to be unnoticed, and it's already going to be illegal under, you know, Brazilian law, for example. So I wouldn't worry so much about that.
May I compliment? Yes.
Yeah, please, Jonas. Yeah.
I totally agree, and I'm so happy, Richard, that you're with us. There's another thing I think balances that risk or kind of compensates for it, and that is invest. But the question is brilliant. But just in the context that investments need time to pay off. So as soon as Ecocide law is likely to come in force, it could be enough that it gets brought up perhaps next year at the assemblies of state parties at the ICC to start a procedure of investigating and getting Ecocide law in place. Before it's kind of in place, that will kill a lot of investments. So because you have no chance to get payback. So, and I think that effect will be huge.
Yeah, brilliant. And Jonas, do you want to go on to that question?
Can I address the question of what can people do?
Yeah, please, Vala. That's what I was just going to ask. Yeah, please.
Well, we are all a part of our local democracy. So absolutely crucial is to start the conversation, with your friends, with your family, with your parliamentarian, hold a meeting, just make people aware of that this is a possibility. Because, and there are already Stop Ecocide and Ecocide something or other organization in many countries around the world. So find one or found one yourself and start the campaign, because we all have to do this together. And the more countries, and so this is done at government level, the more countries we have involved, the better. And it so happens that Iceland is leading both the Council of Europe and the Nordic Council this year. So I'm lobbying my prime minister and the people in parliament. And you could do something similar, because if you are in Europe, then your country is a member of the Council of Europe. There are 47 countries that are a part of that. And if you are if you live in the Nordic countries, then you are part of the Nordic Council. So there are a lot that you can do other than just sit in a corner and think about it. Go out there, shout, support the youngsters who are demanding this in Stockholm.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Jonas,
anything you want to add? Yeah.
Yes, sorry. I was, and I don't know, Richard, perhaps you'd like to add as well. I so agree with Vala, of course. And I just want to reinforce the importance of having many voices. Vala and I did a report about the climate released in November, and it was interesting to see the reactions from experts in climate that kind of felt for Ecocide law that this is a kind of a huge complicated issue. It's very unlikely that it's been thought through in such a detail that it actually will help the climate crisis. And then they read the report and changed their mind totally. Yeah. And kind of said that, well, you thought about this, and the expert drafting panel thought about that and that. So it's kind of a no-brainer suddenly for experts in climate science. So it would be a mistake to believe that Ecocide is something for only legal scholars. It's important to get more walks of life involved, and don't underestimate the importance of your own personal network of getting people to kind of look into this very well thought through definition and idea.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you both. I'm going to take some more questions. So we've got Charles Ross first, and then Roland and Ellie. So Charles?
Yeah, I put the question in the chat. I'm a textile specialist, and I'm starting to read overtures of what I read about in Rob Billett's book, Exposure, or Dark Waters, the movie. There's a lot of textile legislation coming in the very near future, which hints towards forever chemicals and the such like that I see this reaching into. Do we know if any attempt has been made to integrate it to both American and European textile work?
Okay, that's quite a detailed question, but thank you so much. Roland?
Again, I put my question in the chat, but I'll just repeat it.
Please, yeah, do, because I think it's important everybody hears you directly. It's a bit more interactive that way.
Really, I wanted to ask about what forms of penalties would you recommend? And above all, could large fines be used to transfer wealth in cash and in kind into loss and damage restorative climate justice?
Thanks, brilliant. And Ellie.
Hello, thank you so much. These presentations are incredible and I'm learning a lot. This is an entry point for me for Ecocide law. I have a couple questions about the process here. And I know it was mentioned that adopting this amendment would require about a two-thirds majority of the state parties. And curious about just the level of kind of commitment that you're seeing and sensing and what the kind of likelihood of reaching that is. If the vote, I think was mentioned, would be in December, if that's likely to be this December. If so, what are the kind of main coalitions who are working on getting this agenda on, or getting this onto the agenda? Just sort of overall the process of that. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Ellie. That's really clear. Okay, so there's a question about text, the link to the textile side. There's a question of whether large fines could be used also to link into doing something about loss and damage. And then Ellie's question about how far along this line are we? When might we, how hopeful can we be of getting ratification and when? So who'd like to go first on that? Any of those?
I kind of.
Yeah, go Jonas.
I kind of feel it's Richard is the more experts than me. But one thing with the threshold of ecocide, I cannot answer directly on the legislation for chemicals specifically. I have a colleague that works with it, but I cannot. But from a sense of ecocide, you need knowledge when it comes to that you need to be aware of that you cause this. And a lot of these chemicals, they are changed and altered. I've looked at it in particular for the refrigeration and the industry that heats and cools buildings. And there also you change you make slight changes, and then you kind of get under the umbrella of legislation, but you really know that they are still dangerous, or they are dangerous in new ways. It's very easy to show that chemically. It's just that the legislation is slow. So, and I think if you would do something that is really gruesome, and I can imagine several cases, I think ecocide law could potentially work, because when it comes to refrigeration and those kind of chemicals, nothing really new has happened, but you change it. So it's kind of I'll stop there, I think.
Okay, thanks. And Richard, any comment you want to make on either that or the question of loss and fines and loss and damages?
Yeah, I think for the penalties, because it's an international crime, it's only going to be dealing with really serious harm. And a prison sentence is almost always part of the penalty. But at the ICC, there can also be financial remedies. So there can be awards either to individuals or collective awards. So, for example, to a community. And that seems really appropriate in ecocide cases where you might, if let's say a corporate executive is indicted, prosecuted, convicted, he or she may be given some prison time, but then may also face a fine, and that fine can go towards the rehabilitation of the environment in the community involved. Now, of course, it would need to be paid by the individual, not the corporation. So there may only be a limited amount of money available, but there's also a trust fund at the ICC whereby states or philanthropists can put money into the trust fund, and that can be used in the awards. So there's those options. In relation to the other question about getting the 2/3 majority. I mean, that's a whole process. But what really needs to happen is that a sort of big state, in inverted commas, gets behind it. A state basically who provides a lot of funding to the ICC and has a lot of influence through political lobbying, etc. Once one big state gets behind it, then a lot of others will follow. There's already a lot of states, for example, island states, who are supportive.
Yeah.
But of course, they're very small and they don't have the power, perhaps even collectively, to push this through. So you're waiting for a critical mass to coalesce, and then others will surely jump on board. And it does, you don't have to have the 2/3 to put forward the amendment. So you can put forward the amendment as a single state, and then it gets into the bloodstream of the ICC, and then it becomes part of a discussion. And that may happen this year, it may happen next year, but it's certainly going to happen at some point soon.
Great, brilliant. And perhaps then passing over to Vala or Jonas again, follow on from that. Where do you see, you've already, Vala, said how important it is everybody lobbies their members of parliament, but which state might put their hands up and really push for it? Especially, are there any of the sort of most prominent ones that might? Just any view on that? It's a bit crystal ball, I know, because it's down to all of us.
The problem with these issues is that as soon as you have elections and new parliaments and new ministers, then things change. So it's difficult to predict, but we know it's been the president of France and Prime Minister of Canada, they have nodded in the right direction. The Foreign Minister of Finland also. So the hope is that some of these big countries will actually step up, and then small nations which really need this law, because they are drowning, can come in along with those big countries. But I don't really have enough knowledge of what's going on in all the different organizations to be able to answer that fully.
And I see in the chat, what about Brazil with the new government, for instance? And we've talked before.
There has been some discussion to take Bolsonaro for crimes of ecocide, but that would be in retrospect, and I understand that is not possible. But so there is a new environment minister in Brazil who is an indigenous person, and so he hopefully will engage with this. But how far the discussion has gone, I don't really know.
No, but that's a really important one, and we something in Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We will follow up and feed this in also to the Wellbeing Economy governments, which includes Canada and Iceland and Finland. So as you know, Vala. So I think sadly we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. It's really absolutely fascinating discussion and wonderful presentations. And as I say, Tobele, I think Tobele and Monica, can we make sure we can make the slides available to people as well? Is that doable? I know they've been.
Yes.
Yep, we can do that, can we? Yep. Okay, brilliant. I know Jonas has put it in the chat, so do have a look. Do save the chat as well as another task, but we can do that. So to wrap up, I think one of the things that I've said in the report, and by the way, I so strongly recommend this report to everybody. It is a brilliant report. It's so clear. It sets out why this is so important. It sets out how it's going to be put into law. It sets out the definition. It's very, very compelling, and it covers a lot of the ground that's been so brilliantly made in the presentations. And why I said at the beginning, I think this is really the most important bit of new legislation, international legislation, proposed so far in the 21st century. It's so important. It's so important if you start just even at the economic level and leveling the playing field has been said. That's obviously important economically and in terms of people's livelihoods. But it goes way beyond that. It's so important about how changing our mindsets about, do we start really revering nature and thinking about it? This is a game changer. And it's so important morally as well. And I think the churches, you know, we've already seen the Pope is behind this. So we need to be those of you in business, please take it out to your business. Those of you in NGOs, get them involved. Those of you who can lobby parliaments or campaign, do that. Those of you with a faith, please talk to your people in that faith. This is something we all have a responsibility for, and it will make a massive difference. And, you know, lastly, you know, we all, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is absolutely committed to economic system change. This is the sort of major piece of change that will shift the system. This is a system shifter, as we saw in the slides. This is important at every level. So please support it, read it, back it, take it to your, you know, talk about it in your family. This is all of us. And I want to say a huge shout out of thanks to Vala, to Jonas, and to Richard. And also, though you haven't heard from her, Monica, I'm not sure I pronounced your last name properly, Monica Schult, as the person that has done the editing of this and a lot of the background work to support all the teams working on it. Thanks to her, and thanks to all the other people that have been working on this, and thanks to the people who have supported this report. So huge thank you. This is a stage on something absolutely critical. It's down to all of us to keep pushing. Thanks very much indeed. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's been a wonderful audience. Thank you. And we'll say goodbye. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you to everybody that's joined. But really appreciate your chairing, Stuart. Absolutely incredible. And for those who are still here, we'd love you to join us at our next WEAll talk, which is happening on the 23rd. Oh, where's my camera? There I am. The 23rd of February. We have Matt Scott, an incredible youth, speaking on the power of storytelling. So if you'd like to join that, the link is right here in the chat and you can register. And for those of you who put questions in the chat, there was some that we couldn't obviously get to, but we will share it with the team, and hopefully there will be, you know, some way that we can respond to you at a later stage. So we will definitely save the chat and share your questions and thoughts with the Ecocide team. So thank you once again to everybody for joining, and we hope to see you at the next WEAll talk. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.